The wind screamed like a wild beast over the frozen plains of Arcturus 9, whipping ice shards into the swirling gray sky and driving them against the jagged rocks scattered across the land. Beneath this endless storm, an alien child stumbled forward, every breath a struggle against the cold that gnawed deep into their thin skin. Their small, trembling hands clawed at the ground as frost crept over their pale blue fingers, numbing them, stealing feeling with cruel precision. Each step was harder than the last. Their legs shook and threatened to give out. The child's wide, dark eyes scanned the bleak horizon, searching for any sign of shelter or warmth, but only the relentless storm met their gaze. Above, thick clouds blocked the weak light of the distant sun, turning the day into an endless twilight that blurred the line between land and sky. The child's breath came out in ragged puffs, freezing instantly into tiny clouds that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Their heart pounded fiercely, a desperate drumbeat that pushed them to keep moving, even as their body begged for rest. They remembered the crash, the explosion that had torn their family's ship apart, scattering survivors across this hostile world, and how the storm had come without warning, swallowing all hope in its icy jaws. Alone and terrified, the child knew that the cold could kill them if they didn't find shelter soon. The howling wind tore at their thin cloak, threatening to rip it away, and the child wrapped their arms tightly around themselves, trying to hold on to whatever warmth remained. Their mind raced, picturing the faces of their family, hoping they had somehow survived somewhere out there in the storm. But fear clawed its way in, whispering that they were truly alone. As the blizzard intensified, the child's vision blurred and their legs buckled. They collapsed onto the frozen ground, the bitter wind cutting through their clothing like knives. Tears mixed with the falling snow as they lay there, numb and fading, the cold pressing closer and closer, threatening to take them forever into the endless winter night. Just as the child's eyes fluttered shut and hope seemed lost, a shadow moved against the white chaos. At first it was just a dark shape, a flicker of movement swallowed by the storm's rage. Then it grew clearer, a figure in heavy gear, stepping carefully but with purpose, battling the tempest as if it was nothing. The human's face was hidden behind a helmet, but their eyes shone with determination and warmth that contrasted sharply with the frozen wasteland. They called out softly, their voice barely audible over the storm, but enough to stir the child's fading senses. The child opened their eyes and saw the human reaching out, extending a gloved hand. The storm raged around them both, but in that moment, the world seemed to narrow down to the two figures, one almost lost to the cold, the other a beacon of hope and survival. The human knelt beside the child, wrapping them in a thick thermal blanket, their hands steady and strong as they lifted the fragile life from the icy ground. The child's body was cold and weak, but the warmth of the human's presence sparked a flicker of life deep inside. Together, they fought the storm's fury, moving slowly toward shelter that the human promised was near. Every step was a battle against wind and ice, but the child clung to the human, driven by the sudden surge of hope. As the shelter came into view, a small dome-shaped pod buried partially under snow, the child's strength returned bit by bit, warmed by the human's steady heartbeat and the promise of safety. Inside, the warmth was like a miracle, wrapping around the child like a shield against the storm's cruel touch. The child looked up at the human's face, still hidden behind the visor but radiating kindness. In that frozen wasteland, amid the storm's endless rage, a fragile bond was born, one that would challenge the darkness to come. The storm still howled outside, but inside the shelter, there was only silence, hope, and the soft sound of a child's breathing growing steadier by the second. Inside the small shelter pod, the cold storm's roar outside was muffled into a distant howl, but the alien child still trembled, their body weak and shivering despite the warmth wrapping around them like a soft blanket. The human crouched beside the child, checking their condition carefully. Their gloved hands moved with gentle urgency, peeling back layers of frozen clothing, revealing pale skin that looked almost fragile enough to break. The child's breath was shallow and their lips were blue, signs that the cold had gone too. deep into their body. The human's voice was low and calm, a steady sound meant to comfort in this place of desperation, though they spoke in a language the child could not yet understand. Instead, they used simple gestures, pointing to a small heating device and then to the child's chest, trying to show that warmth could bring life back. Slowly, the child's eyes fluttered open, confusion mingling with pain, but the gentle light in the human's eyes sparked a fragile trust. Outside, the wind still battered the pod, making the metal walls hum with the storm's fury. But inside, the human worked quickly, activating systems designed to stabilize and heal. They connected small sensors to the child's wrist and neck, machines blinking softly, measuring heartbeat and temperature. With each beep, hope grew a little stronger. The child tried to move, weak but determined, their hands clutching at the human's arms, a silent plea for help and connection. The human responded with a warm smile behind their visor, offering a small pack of nutrient paste, encouraging the child to eat. At first, the child resisted, too weak and unsure, but hunger won out, and slowly they accepted the food, the taste strange but comforting. Time passed in a blur of care and quiet moments, the storm outside refusing to relent. As if testing the limits of this new bond, the human, experienced in survival and rescue, knew the child's people were not like humans. But something deep inside told them this life was precious, worth every effort. As the child regained strength, their eyes brightened and they reached out tentatively, touching the human's helmet, curious about the strange suit that saved them. The human responded by gently removing their helmet, revealing a kind, tired face marked by scars of many battles and long travels. The child gasped, softly, both amazed and wary. This was a human, different from anything they had ever known. Communication was difficult, the child's language strange, but the human used simple words and gestures, trying to bridge the vast gap between their worlds. They pointed to themselves and said, "I help." Then to the child and said, "Safe." Now. The child nodded slowly, their fear easing as trust took root. Yet, outside this fragile safety, danger lurked. The human scanners detected faint signals beyond the storm. Unknown ships, likely enemies searching for survivors. The child's eyes widened in fear, sensing the threat but unable to speak it aloud. The human's jaw tightened, realizing their rescue was only the first step in a larger fight. They explained, with urgent gestures and broken words, that they had to leave the pod soon to find a safer place away from those who hunted the child. The child, now stronger but still fragile, nodded, ready to follow this strange savior into the unknown. They packed what little the child had left, a small personal item clutched tightly in their hands, and prepared to leave the temporary shelter. Outside, the storm was dying down, but the air remained cold and harsh, the land covered in endless ice and snow. Together, human and alien stepped into the frozen wasteland once more, each step heavy with uncertainty, but filled with a shared will to survive. As they moved, the human taught the child simple survival techniques, how to read the land, find hidden paths, and avoid dangers lurking beneath the ice. The child learned quickly, their sharp mind absorbing knowledge that might save them both. Slowly, the bond grew stronger, no longer just a rescue, but a partnership born from the hardest circumstances. Nights were spent huddled beneath temporary shelters, the human's warmth and stories filling the darkness, while the child's quiet presence became a steady comfort. Yet, every shadow outside reminded them of the enemies still searching, the unknown forces that would not stop until the child was captured. The tension tightened, the urgency pushing them forward, but so did hope. Hope that two very different beings could face this harsh world together, that the human spirit's resilience could light the way in the darkest hours. And so, beneath the endless sky of ice and storm, a fragile new life began. One where survival was not just about beating the cold, but about trusting another, about fighting back against fear with courage and compassion. The icy wind had finally softened as the human and the alien child moved carefully through the frozen wasteland, but the quiet stillness only made the danger more real, more pressing. The human scanner beeped softly in their hand, a warning light flashing, a sign that they were not alone. Somewhere beyond the distant ridges, faint but clear, were signals from other ships, unknown and unfriendly, hunting for the scattered survivors of the crashed alien vessel. The child, sensing the tension, stayed close, their small hands gripping the human's arm, their wide eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. The human studied the horizon, noting strange shapes far away, ships low and slow, their engines masked by the cold planet's storms, hunting like predators in the shadows. The threat was real and closing fast. They needed to move fast, but the harsh terrain was unforgiving. Jagged ice cliffs rose suddenly from the plains, hidden crevasses yawned beneath a thin crust of snow, and the cold was relentless, stealing strength and focus with every breath. The human pointed toward a cluster of ice caves marked on their map, a place that could hide them from scanners and enemies alike. The child nodded, trusting without question, and together they began the difficult climb toward shelter. The air grew thinner as they climbed. Their breaths labored, but they pushed on, the knowledge of pursuers driving their tired bodies forward. As they reached the entrance to the caves, the human signaled the child to stay low and quiet. Inside, the darkness was thick and cold, but it was a shield against the storm outside and the watchers beyond. The child shivered again, but this time it was not just cold. It was the fear of the unknown. The human lit a small lantern, its soft glow casting strange shadows on the jagged walls. They settled in briefly, catching their breath and scanning the cave's entrance with a handheld device, searching for signs of movement or hidden dangers. The child's sharp eyes noticed unusual markings on the cave walls, scratches and symbols that hinted at previous visitors. The human studied them, puzzled but alert. These signs were warnings, left by someone who knew the dangers of the planet, someone who had survived, or failed to survive, the predators that now hunted them. Suddenly the scanner beeped again, more urgently. The enemy ships were closer, their search patterns widening. Time was running out. The human made a quick decision. They could not stay hidden here for long. They gathered their meager supplies, checking weapons and tools, preparing for a confrontation that seemed inevitable. The child, despite exhaustion, showed a spark of courage. They had survived the storm and the cold, but now they faced a threat that was alive, intelligent, and relentless. The human explained their plan through gestures and broken words. They would move at night, using the planet's long hours of darkness to slip past the enemy patrols. The child understood and nodded, their eyes shining with a mixture of fear and hope. As darkness fell, the two slipped from the cave, moving low and fast across the frozen ground. The human's knowledge of the terrain proved invaluable, guiding them through hidden valleys and over snow-covered ridges. But the enemies were patient, sending small scout teams to search for signs of life. At one point, the human froze, pressing the child against a large boulder as a scout ship passed just overhead, its bright searchlight sweeping dangerously close. The child's heart pounded, but they remained silent, trusting the human's calm control. Hours stretched on like this, danger close, but unseen. The cold bit deep, and the child's body trembled, but they did not give up. The human whispered, stories of Earth's explorers and survivors, using these tales to keep the child's spirits up, to remind them that no matter how dark the night, dawn always comes. Suddenly, as they crossed a narrow ice bridge over a deep crevasse, a sharp crack echoed beneath their feet. The ice trembled and shifted. The child froze, terrified they would fall. The human grabbed the child instantly, pulling them back to safety just as the ice gave way with a roar, plunging into the frozen abyss below. The close call left them both shaken, but more determined. They pressed on, finally reaching a hidden valley shielded by massive glaciers, a place marked on the human's map as a safe zone used by early explorers. Here, the terrain was rough, but offered shelter and resources, pockets of geothermal warmth and strange alien plants that could provide food and medicine. The human helped the child gather what they could, but their respite was brief. The scanner's warning came again. Enemy patrols had detected their presence nearby, closing in fast. The human realized that they had no choice but to fight or be captured. They set traps around the camp and prepared weapons, working silently and quickly. The child, now more confident, helped as best as they could, using what they had learned on their journey. As the enemy closed, The two hid in a narrow crevice, hearts pounding, listening to the heavy footsteps and harsh voices of the hunters. The human held the child tightly, whispering promises of protection and survival. Then, in the cold silence before the storm of battle, the child understood something new. That they were not just a victim anymore, but a fighter, part of something bigger. The hunters burst into the valley, their weapons drawn, but the human and the child were ready. The battle was fierce and desperate, using the environment and quick thinking to outsmart the enemy. The human's experience and the child's unique abilities combined to turn the tide, forcing the attackers to retreat with heavy losses. As silence fell once more over the frozen land, the human and child looked at each other with newfound respect and hope. They were still alone in a dangerous world, but together they had become more than survivors. They were a force that no storm or enemy could break. The hidden threat remained, but so did their courage, lighting the way forward in the endless cold. After the battle, the frozen valley settled into a heavy silence, broken only by the crackle of small fires the human had built to warm their hands and dry their clothes. The alien child sat close, wrapped in a thick blanket that the human had given, their eyes still wide but calmer than before. The child was quiet now, absorbing everything around them, watching the human carefully, as if trying to understand this strange creature who had saved their life and fought so fiercely for it. The human, too, was watching the child, noticing how their eyes flickered with intelligence, curiosity, and something else, a spark that reminded them of hope. It was a feeling. The human knew well, born of countless battles and hardships faced back on Earth and across the stars, the spark of courage, the refusal to give in even when all seems lost. As the cold night pressed against the valley's rocky walls, the human began to share stories. They spoke slowly and clearly, using simple words, gestures, and images drawn in the snow. They told of Earth, a blue and green world filled with vast oceans, endless skies, and people who had survived wars, disasters, and the endless challenges of life. The child listened, fascinated by tales of invention, resilience, and kindness. They heard of explorers who crossed deserts, climbed mountains, and sailed into the unknown, driven by curiosity and the will to survive. The human spoke of friends, lost and found, of mistakes made and lessons learned, and through it all, the child began to see not just a stranger, but a teacher, a protector, and perhaps even a friend. The human, in turn, watched the child carefully as the alien showed signs of understanding and learning. The child began to mimic simple words, trying to speak the human's language, stumbling but determined. The human's face softened, seeing in the child a reflection of humanity's own fight to communicate and connect across divides. During the days that followed, the two moved cautiously through the valley, the human teaching the child how to find shelter, gather food from strange alien plants, and recognize signs of danger in the shifting ice and snow. The child's sharp mind absorbed everything quickly, their unique senses helping to detect subtle changes in the environment that even the human might miss. They developed a rhythm, working together, trusting each other more with every passing hour. But even as they grew stronger and closer, the threat outside never vanished. The human scanner still picked up faint signals of the enemy's presence, and the night was filled with distant echoes of engines and low voices carried on the wind. The child, once silent with fear, now whispered warnings when they sensed danger approaching, their body tense and alert. One night, under a sky filled with distant stars shining cold and bright, the humans shared something more than survival skills. They shared the reason why humans never gave up, why they kept fighting no matter the odds. They spoke of something called hope, a belief that even in the darkest moments, a spark inside could light the way to a better future. The child looked up, eyes wide and shining, feeling that spark for the first time deep inside their own heart. From that night, the child's fear began to fade, replaced by a quiet strength. They practiced moving silently, using their alien agility to scout ahead and find safe paths. The human, impressed by the child's progress, allowed themselves to hope, not just for survival, but for something greater, that this bond could change the course of both their lives. But the dangers around them were growing. and soon, that hope would be tested in ways neither expected. As they prepared to move again, the human found an old data pad among the supplies salvaged from the crashed ship. It contained information about the child's people, details about their culture, technology, and a warning about the enemies who hunted them, a ruthless faction that saw the child's species as a threat to control. The human read the data carefully, their jaw tightening with determination. They realized that protecting the child was not just about survival. It was about standing against cruelty and injustice, about fighting for a future where kindness and courage could win. That night, the child and human sat side by side, looking up at the endless sky, the stars reflecting their silent promise. No matter how harsh the storm, the human spark would burn bright, guiding them through the cold and the darkness, toward a new dawn neither could face alone. The first light of dawn crept slowly over the frozen horizon, painting the jagged ice in soft shades of pink and gold, but beneath the beauty of the rising sun, danger still lurked close. The human and the alien child had spent the long night preparing for what lay ahead, knowing that the enemy forces would not stop their pursuit. The human checked their gear carefully, making sure every weapon was ready and every supply was accounted for, while the child gathered what little they could carry, clutching a small, worn token from their lost family, their most precious possession. Together they stepped out from the shelter of the valley, their breath forming clouds in the cold morning air as they moved cautiously toward the distant ridge that promised safer ground. The child's sharp eyes scanned the horizon, alert for any sign of movement, while the human's experienced instincts kept them steady, watching for traps or ambushes hidden beneath the snow. The storm that had once raged so fiercely was now only a whisper in the wind, but the silence was heavier, filled with the weight of anticipation. Suddenly the scanner beeped urgently. Enemy ships appeared again, faster and more numerous this time, cutting across the ice like dark shadows determined to end the chase. The human's voice was calm but firm as they urged the child to hurry, their heart pounding in time with the approaching danger. The two broke into a run, sprinting across the frozen plains with only the strength of their will to push them forward. Behind them, the enemy's weapons fired bursts of light and energy that lit the sky, striking the ice with deadly force. The ground shook, and snow exploded around them as they dodged and slipped, narrowly escaping each blast. The child's legs ached, but they refused to fall. The human shouted encouragement, their own muscles burning from the effort, their eyes locked on the ridge that meant safety. As they neared the crest, the child spotted a group of figures waiting. Other survivors, hidden allies who had been watching and waiting for this moment. The human recognized them immediately, members of a resistance group who opposed the enemy. Faction, warriors from many worlds united by a common cause. Relief surged through both human and child as the group rushed forward to help, forming a protective circle around them. The resistance fighters had brought technology and weapons far beyond what the human carried alone, and they quickly set up defensive positions to hold back the pursuing enemy forces. The battle that followed was fierce and chaotic, the frozen ground shaking under the weight of clashing forces. The human fought alongside the resistance, their movements precise and strong, while the child stayed close, learning from the bravery and teamwork of their new allies. The enemy was relentless, their numbers overwhelming, but the human spark, hope, courage, and unbreakable will, burned brighter than ever. In the heart of the battle, the child found strength they never knew they had, using their unique abilities to help protect the group, surprising even themselves with their bravery. Slowly the tide turned as the resistance pressed forward, pushing the enemy back and securing the ridge. The sun climbed higher, casting warm light over the battlefield, and with the enemy retreating, a quiet victory settled over the frozen land. Exhausted but unbroken, the human and the child stood together among their new allies, their faces marked with sweat, dirt, and smiles of hard-won hope. The child looked up at the human, a silent question in their eyes. What would come next? The human smiled back, knowing that this was only the beginning of something greater. With the enemy threat diminished, the resistance could now focus on rebuilding and protecting not just this planet but others threatened by the same dark forces. The human and the alien child, once strangers from different worlds, had forged a bond that symbolized a new alliance, one built on trust, courage, and the shared desire for freedom. As the morning light grew stronger, they spoke of the future, of journeys to distant stars, of new friendships, and of a universe where different beings could stand together against the darkness. The child held the small token close, feeling a new hope bloom within, knowing that they were no longer alone and that the human spark would guide them through whatever storms lay ahead. Together, beneath the vast, endless sky, they stepped forward, into the dawn of a new alliance, ready to face the challenges of tomorrow with strength, unity, and the unyielding fire of hope.